Caligula and Three Other Plays by Albert Camus. Literary Quotes. The following video content presents and discusses literary quotes crafted to enhance your academic study, deepen literary analysis, and inspire your writing. If you're interested in Albert Camus's philosophy quotes, click the link below or explore our channel's philosophy series. Albert Camus's Caligula and Three Other Plays presents a thought-provoking exploration of power, human suffering, and existential angst. The play Caligula, central to the collection, portrays the story of the Roman Emperor Caligula, who, after losing his sister and lover Drusilla, embarks on a brutal journey to understand the nature of power and the absurdity of existence. Camus uses Caligula's descent into tyranny to illustrate his philosophy of the absurd, the conflict between the human desire for meaning and the indifferent universe. Each of the plays in this collection, Caligula, The Misunderstanding, State of Siege, and The Just Assassins, delves into moral dilemmas and the complexities of human choice, offering a reflection on the struggle for personal freedom and the consequences of rebellion against a world devoid of meaning. Quote 1. I shall never rest again. Caligula declares his refusal to find peace, an acknowledgement of the profound unrest within him. This statement reflects his belief that as long as he is unable to achieve the impossible, controlling life, death, and the universe itself, he will remain in perpetual turmoil. It highlights his inner conflict and his decision to reject contentment, further driving him into a state of madness and relentless ambition. Quote 2. This world of ours, the scheme of things as they call it, is quite intolerable. Caligula's observation reveals his disdain for the structure and order of the world. He views it as fundamentally unjust, filled with suffering and limitations that prevent true freedom or happiness. This sentiment fuels his tyrannical behavior as he seeks to reshape the world according to his own radical vision, disregarding the rules that others accept as natural or inevitable. Quote 3. What's the use to me of a firm hand? What use is the amazing power that's mine, if I can't have the sun set in the east, if I can't reduce the sum of suffering and make an end of death? Caligula laments the limitations of his imperial power, realizing that even his supreme authority cannot alter the basic laws of nature or relieve human suffering. This sense of powerlessness in the face of universal truths frustrates him deeply, reinforcing his obsession with achieving the impossible and his growing disillusionment with life's inherent constraints. Quote 4. I am taking over a kingdom where the impossible is king. Caligula's proclamation reflects his desire to create a realm governed not by reason or reality, but by his will to achieve the unattainable. This line encapsulates his descent into madness, where he believes he can transcend human limitations and reshape the world to align with his vision, no matter how irrational or destructive it may seem to others. Quote 5. I shall make this age of ours a kingly gift, the gift of equality. Here, Caligula asserts his desire to impose radical equality, but his notion of equality is nihilistic, as it involves the leveling of all distinctions, including life and death. His aim is to dismantle the existing hierarchy of values, leaving nothing sacred or untouchable, a vision that leads to chaos and destruction rather than justice or harmony. Quote 6. Love, Cisonia. I've learned the truth about love. It's nothing. Nothing. Caligula rejects love as meaningless, stripping it of any significance in his world where the pursuit of power and the impossible are paramount. His dismissal of love underscores his increasing detachment from human emotions and relationships, further isolating him in his tyrannical quest and deepening his descent into cruelty and despair. Quote 7. It's not the first time Rome has seen a man wielding unlimited power, but it's the first time he sets no limit to his use of it. and counts mankind, and the world we know, for nothing. Chaerea observes that while Rome has witnessed many rulers with absolute power, Caligula is unique in his boundless and reckless application of authority. This quote emphasizes that Caligula's actions are driven by a disregard for human life and societal values, making him a particularly dangerous figure. His ambition to control everything without moral or ethical limits threatens the very fabric of Roman society. Quote 8. To lose one's life is no great matter. When the time comes, I'll have the courage to lose mine. But what's intolerable is to see one's life being drained of meaning, to be told there's no reason for existing. Chaerea reflects on the value of life, stating that facing death is not the most significant challenge. What he finds unbearable is living in a world where life is rendered meaningless by Caligula's tyranny. Caligula's actions strip away purpose and values, leaving his subjects in existential despair, which Chaerea sees as the true tragedy. Quote 9. He is converting his philosophy into corpses, and, unfortunately for us, it's a philosophy that's logical from start to finish. Chaerea criticizes Caligula's philosophy, which is being implemented with deadly consequences. The emperor's destructive ideas are disturbingly consistent and coherent, making them more dangerous because they follow a clear, albeit twisted, logic. This philosophy turns into a literal execution of people, as Caligula rationalizes the taking of lives to serve his intellectual and ideological goals. Quote 10. It is only a matter of time and patience. In this line, Helicon, reading from Caligula's writings, describes the inevitability of death under the emperor's reign. All subjects are guilty simply by virtue of being under Caligula's rule, and their deaths are merely a matter of timing. This fatalistic view underlines the emperor's total control over life and death, suggesting that patience is all that's required for his subjects to meet their demise. Quote 11. A man dies because he is guilty. A man is guilty because he is one of Caligula's subjects. This line encapsulates Caligula's twisted logic, wherein guilt is a condition of being alive under his rule. It presents an absurd yet terrifying premise that underpins his tyranny. Caligula's reasoning suggests that all his subjects are inherently guilty, and thus deserving of death, making his power absolute and arbitrary. Quote 12. Fear, Cisonia, don't you agree, is a noble emotion, pure and simple, self-sufficient, like no other. It draws its patent of nobility straight from the guts. Caligula praises fear as the purest emotion, free from the complexities of other human feelings. He revels in his ability to instill fear, seeing it as a primal force that elevates his control over others. This view reflects his descent into cruelty, where power is measured by the terror he can evoke, stripping away human dignity and reducing interactions to dominance and submission. Quote 13. Famine begins tomorrow. With this command, Caligula declares his intent to create a catastrophe simply to demonstrate his freedom and power. He views the suffering of his people as an opportunity to assert his dominance, reducing their lives to mere pawns in his quest to prove his absolute control. This cold and calculated decision illustrates the extreme lengths he will go to in order to feel powerful. Quote 14. Let's put method into his madness. Chaerea suggests that the best way to deal with Caligula's insanity is not to confront it directly, but to subtly encourage it. By allowing Caligula's madness to run its course, they can wait for his ideas to collapse under their own irrational weight. This tactic reflects Chaerea's belief that Caligula's reign can only end when his unchecked insanity leads to his own downfall. Quote 15. You're afraid I'll poison you. You suspect me. You're keeping an eye on me. Caligula confronts Chaerea with accusations that he is afraid of being poisoned, despite Chaerea's denial. This scene shows Caligula's growing paranoia and how he manipulates Maria by turning suspicion into a form of treason. His questioning reflects his tyrannical need to dominate others, creating an atmosphere of fear and suspicion, where even perceived doubts about his intentions are punishable. Quote 16. "You shall die nobly, a rebel's death." In this line, Caligula sentences Maria to death not for the crime of taking an antidote, but for the supposed courage to oppose him. Caligula presents this as a twisted form of honor, illustrating his perverse logic. He grants Maria a noble death, manipulating the situation to make it seem as though rebellion against him is a valorous yet futile act, reinforcing his absolute control over life and death. Quote 17. "No matter. It all comes to the same thing in the end. A little sooner, a little later." After forcing Maria to drink poison, Caligula dismisses the distinction between Maria's antidote and medicine for asthma, claiming that death is inevitable. This statement underscores Caligula's nihilistic worldview, where life and death lose all meaning, and the timing of death becomes irrelevant. His indifference to human life is emphasized, showing his descent into cruelty and madness. Quote 18. "Because I fear nobody. Killing him or being killed, either way out will do." Scipio reveals his profound hatred for Caligula, expressing that he has no fear of life or death. His willingness to either kill the emperor or face his own death demonstrates his despair and readiness to act against the tyrant. This statement highlights the extreme emotional toll Caligula's reign has taken on those around him, pushing Scipio to the point where he sees no meaningful difference between life and death. Quote 19. "What's best in me is my hatred." When Caesonia asks Scipio to reflect on his best qualities, he responds by stating that his hatred for Caligula is the most powerful force within him. This line illustrates how the cruelty of Caligula's regime has corrupted Scipio's spirit, reducing him to a state where hatred overshadows all other emotions, including love or hope. It encapsulates the depth of the suffering inflicted by the emperor's tyranny. Quote 20. "It's those we have loved, those who loved us and whom we did not love, the celestial gang, always, always with us." Caligula reflects on the burden of memories, stating that it is not the people he has killed who haunt him, but the loved ones he failed to love in return. This admission reveals a glimpse of his inner torment, where guilt and emotional detachment weigh heavily on him. It suggests that despite his outward cruelty, Caligula is haunted by his inability to connect with others on a deeper emotional level. Quote 21. "Ah, if only in this loneliness, this ghoul-haunted wilderness of mine, I could know, but for a moment, real solitude, real silence, the throbbing stillness of a tree." Caligula longs for true solitude, expressing a desire to escape the constant noise and chaos of his life. This moment of vulnerability shows that despite his power, he feels trapped and overwhelmed by the weight of his existence. His wish for silence and peace contrasts sharply with the destruction and disorder he has caused, highlighting the inner contradictions and isolation of his character. Quote 22. "Make known to us the truth about this world, which is that it has none." In the litany led by Caesonia, this line highlights the core of Caligula's philosophy, where he believes the world is devoid of inherent meaning or truth. His reign reflects this nihilistic perspective, as he seeks to impose his will upon the world, demonstrating his belief that life's values and systems are arbitrary constructs that he can manipulate or destroy at will. Quote 23. "I've merely realized that there's only one way of getting even with the gods. All that's needed is to be as cruel as they." Caligula explains that to rival the gods, one must match their cruelty. This statement shows his bitter view of divinity, where he equates power with the ability to inflict suffering. It reflects his descent into tyranny, where he justifies his acts of violence and control as a way of asserting dominance over the universe and fate itself, echoing his desire to outdo the gods. Quote 24. There's no understanding fate. Therefore, I choose to play the part of fate. Caligula embraces the role of fate, deciding to embody its arbitrary and unyielding nature. This statement captures his self-appointed mission to act as a force beyond human control or reason, mirroring the unpredictability and indifference he attributes to fate. By doing so, he justifies his cruel actions as part of his personal expression of power and inevitability. Quote 25. The great mistake you people make is not to take the drama seriously enough. Caligula believes that others fail to recognize the importance of the theatrical nature of power and life. His entire rule is built on staging spectacles and manipulating reality as if life were a performance. This line underscores his view that leadership, power, and even existence itself are forms of drama, where success lies in mastering the roles and the illusions they create. Quote 26. I see, and I rejoice to see, the only God I've worshipped on this earth, foul and craven as the human heart. Caligula confesses that the only deity he truly reveres is the baseness of human nature. This moment of revelation shows his deep cynicism and misanthropy, as he acknowledges that cruelty and cowardice are the true driving forces behind human actions. His admiration for these darker qualities reinforces his justification for the brutal, irrational behavior that characterizes his reign. Quote 27. All I want, Helicon, is the moon. For the rest, I've always known what will kill me. Here, Caligula expresses his obsessive desire for the impossible, symbolized by the moon, while acknowledging his awareness of his own mortality. His fixation on obtaining the unattainable reflects his inner turmoil and refusal to accept the limitations of life, even as he recognizes that death is inevitable. This duality between seeking the impossible and knowing his fate captures his tragic and self-destructive nature. Quote 28. You want to live and to be happy. That's all. Caligula mocks Chaerea for his simple desires to live a peaceful and content life. This statement reflects the stark contrast between Caligula's nihilistic, existential outlook and Chaerea's more conventional approach to happiness. Caligula's contempt for such desires shows how far removed he is from ordinary human values, having transcended or rejected them in his quest for something far more elusive and extreme. Quote 29. See what becomes of evidence in an emperor's hands. As Caligula burns the tablet containing evidence of Chaerea's conspiracy, he emphasizes the arbitrary nature of his power. The act symbolizes how absolute power allows him to manipulate reality, absolving or condemning people at will. By destroying the evidence, Caligula demonstrates his control over truth and justice, reinforcing the futility of opposition against his authority. Quote 30. This murder needs honorable men to sponsor it. Chaerea appeals to Scipio, trying to convince him to join the conspiracy against Caligula. Chaerea recognizes that, among all the conspirators, only he and Scipio have purely moral reasons for wanting to stop Caligula's tyranny, untainted by personal grudges or selfish motives. Chaerea emphasizes the need for honor and justice to legitimize their actions, suggesting that the murder of Caligula is not just an act of revenge, but a necessity for the greater good. Quote 31. Even if I killed him, my heart would still be with him. Scipio reveals the depth of his internal conflict. Although he acknowledges the cruelty and madness of Caligula and the suffering he has caused, including the murder of Scipio's father, he also feels a profound connection to the emperor. This emotional bond, which Scipio cannot fully explain, prevents him from fully committing to the conspiracy against Caligula. His confession underscores the complexity of their relationship and the difficulty of choosing sides in a world where loyalty and morality are blurred. Quote 32. To have instilled despair into a young heart is fouler than the foulest of the crimes he has committed up to now. Chaerea condemns Caligula for corrupting the spirit of youth, particularly in Scipio. While Caligula's physical acts of violence and murder are atrocious, Chaerea argues that the emotional and psychological harm Caligula has inflicted, especially by driving Scipio into despair, is an even greater crime. This quote highlights Chaerea's belief that the destruction of hope and innocence is one of the most unforgivable sins, as it damages the very core of what it means to live. Quote 33. Whereas in the past he always summoned you for affairs of state, today he invited you to share with him an artistic emotion. Caesonia conveys Caligula's message to the patricians, noting the absurdity of the emperor's shift from political matters to a strange form of artistic expression. This shift reflects Caligula's growing detachment from reality, as he increasingly indulges in theatrical displays and bizarre performances, using art as a way to manipulate and control his audience. The line underscores the tension between Caligula's role as a ruler and his descent into madness, where art becomes another tool for domination. Quote 34. It's a great misfortune for us all, Caesonia. Chaerea's reaction to the false news of Caligula's death reveals the deep complexity of his feelings toward the emperor. Despite plotting to kill him, Chaerea cannot help but acknowledge the loss of Caligula as a significant and tragic event. This line suggests that even in his death, Caligula's presence looms large, and the chaos he has sown will leave a lasting impact on Rome and its people. Quote 35. No, not ill, unless you invent a name and medicine for the black ulcers that fester in his soul. Caesonia sharply rebukes the patricians' attempts to dismiss Caligula's behavior as mere illness. She points out that what plagues Caligula is not a physical sickness, but a deeper spiritual and psychological corruption. This line captures the essence of Caligula's tragedy. His madness is rooted in his existential despair and inner torment, which no medicine or treatment can cure. It reveals Caesonia's understanding of the darkness within Caligula, which drives his cruelty and tyranny. Quote 36. Life, my friend, is something to be cherished. Had you cherished it enough, you wouldn't have gambled it away so rashly. Caligula speaks these words to Cassius, mocking him for his earlier declaration of willingness to die for the emperor. Caligula uses this moment to deliver a harsh lesson, pointing out the value of life only after Cassius has thrown it away in a rash act of loyalty. This statement reflects Caligula's cynicism and his cruel enjoyment of manipulating others, as he reminds Cassius of the fragility and preciousness of life at the very moment he is about to take it away. Quote 37. My reign has been too happy. There's been no worldwide plague, no religious persecution, not even a rebellion, nothing, in fact, to make us memorable. Caligula laments the lack of significant catastrophes or conflicts during his rule, seeing them as necessary to make his reign stand out in history. His desire to be remembered leads him to instigate chaos and destruction deliberately, showing his disregard for human life and the well-being of the empire. This line encapsulates Caligula's obsession with leaving a legacy, even if it means causing unnecessary suffering to achieve it. Quote 38. I don't need to make a work of art. I live it. Caligula expresses his belief that he embodies art through his actions, blurring the line between life and creation. He claims that his life itself is a masterpiece, one in which his deeds, however cruel or mad, are the ultimate form of artistic expression. This statement reflects his self-perception as both an artist and a ruler, someone who transcends the ordinary by living out his philosophy with absolute power. Quote 39. There's no way out left to us, neither to you nor to me, who am like you in so many ways. Scipio recognizes that both he and Caligula are trapped by their circumstances and by their shared nature. Despite his deep resentment toward Caligula for killing his father, Scipio feels a profound connection to the emperor, acknowledging that they are alike in their existential struggles and their inability to escape their fate. This quote highlights the tragic bond between them, as they are both bound by a similar inner turmoil. Quote 40. When I don't kill, I feel alone. The living don't suffice to people my world and dispel my boredom. Caligula admits that he finds solace only in the presence of the dead, revealing how isolated and disconnected he feels from the living. His cruelty is driven by a sense of emptiness, and only through murder does he feel some form of company. This moment reveals the depth of his madness, as his inability to connect with the living leads him to seek companionship among the dead. Quote 41. No, it's not the men whose sons or fathers I have killed who'll murder me. They, anyhow, have understood. Caligula believes that those he has wronged most severely, those whose loved ones he has killed, understand his actions and are not the ones who seek revenge. Instead, he fears those who have been humiliated or ridiculed by him. This statement reveals his twisted logic and his view that profound suffering brings understanding, while wounded pride leads to hatred and vengeance. Quote 42. Beyond the frontier of pain lies a splendid, sterile happiness. Caligula describes a form of happiness that comes from pushing past the limits of suffering and pain. In this state, he finds a sterile, detached kind of joy, one that is devoid of emotion or connection to others. This idea of happiness is profoundly different from the conventional notion of joy, as it is rooted in isolation and destruction, reinforcing Caligula's nihilistic worldview. Quote 43. Love isn't enough for me. I realized it then, and I realize it again today, when I look at you. Caligula reflects on the inadequacy of love in his life. Even though he once loved Drusilla, he admits that love, for him, is not sufficient to provide meaning or fulfillment. This realization extends to his relationship with Caesonia, showing that he is incapable of forming lasting emotional bonds. His pursuit of power and control has replaced love, leading to his alienation and emotional emptiness. Quote 44. My freedom isn't the right one. Nothing. Nothing yet. Caligula acknowledges that the freedom he has sought through power and cruelty is ultimately hollow. Despite achieving absolute control over others, he finds that it has not brought him the fulfillment or enlightenment he desired. This realization marks a moment of existential crisis, as he confronts the futility of his actions and the emptiness of the path he has chosen. Quote 45. I'm still alive! In his final moments, as the conspirators stab him, Caligula defiantly declares that he is still alive. This last gasp reflects his refusal to surrender even in the face of death. It symbolizes his enduring will to defy fate and his belief in his own invincibility, even as his life slips away. His laughter in these final moments underscores the tragic irony of his life, as he clings to the illusion of power even in his downfall. Quote 46. All I'm longing for is peace, to be able to relax a little. The mother expresses her deep weariness and desire for peace. Despite the grim activities she and her daughter Martha have been engaging in, her primary wish is to find some respite from her exhausting life. This line reflects the weight of her actions on her conscience, suggesting that she is no longer driven by ambition or greed, but simply by a need for rest and escape from the life they have built. Quote 47. Crime is crime, and one should know what one is doing. Martha's blunt statement highlights her cold, calculated approach to the murders they commit. She insists on clarity and directness, rejecting any attempt to soften or evade the reality of their actions. Her pragmatic view of crime shows how desensitized she has become to the violence, focusing on the necessity of their deeds rather than the moral implications. Quote 48. Habit begins with the second crime. The mother explains how the act of killing has become a routine for them. indicating that after the initial murder, the psychological barrier breaks, and repetition follows more easily. This quote reveals how the cycle of violence has normalized in their lives, turning into something almost mechanical, driven by habit rather than malice. Quote 49. I'm eager to be in that country, where the sun kills every question. Martha yearns for a place where the burdens of thought and guilt are erased, symbolized by the hot, blinding sun. She sees this escape to a distant, sun-drenched land as a way to silence the inner turmoil she experiences, longing for freedom from her conscience and the harsh life she currently endures. Quote 50. It's easier to kill what one doesn't know. The mother rationalizes the emotional detachment she maintains from their victims by not looking too closely at them. This detachment makes it easier for her to carry out the murders, as she can view their victims as abstract figures rather than real people. This statement reflects how she copes with the violence, protecting herself from the guilt and horror of her actions. Quote 51. Happiness isn't everything. There is duty, too. Jan defends his decision to return to his mother and sister by framing it as a moral obligation. Even though he had happiness with his wife, Maria, in their life abroad, he feels compelled to fulfill his duty to his family, emphasizing the importance of responsibility over personal satisfaction. His sense of duty drives his actions, even at the cost of disrupting the happiness he already had. Quote 52. No, there's only one way, and it's to do what any ordinary mortal would do, to say, it's I, and to let one's heart speak for itself. Maria urges Jan to act naturally and honestly, believing that the simplest and most direct way to reconnect with his family is to reveal his identity. She appeals to Jan to abandon his complex plans and trust in the power of truth and emotional openness, reflecting her belief that love and sincerity should guide their actions. Quote 53. Surely you could do it without all these complications? Maria questions Jan's elaborate scheme to surprise his family with his identity, pointing out that he is unnecessarily complicating the situation. Her frustration reflects her desire for simplicity and transparency, as she believes that Jan's attempts to manipulate the situation are only causing more confusion and distance between him and his family. Quote 54. There's no question of killing. He'll drink his tea, he'll go to sleep, and he'll be still alive when we carry him to the river. Martha describes their method of murder in a detached, practical way. She removes any emotional weight from the act of killing by framing it as a simple process, almost clinical in nature. This cold description reflects her hardened attitude toward their crimes, where the victims are seen as mere obstacles to her desired freedom. Quote 55. I'm too old to lock my hands again on a man's ankles and feel the body swaying. The mother reflects on her physical and emotional exhaustion. She expresses her weariness with the routine of murder, emphasizing how age has drained her both physically and mentally. Her words highlight the toll that a lifetime of crime has taken on her, as she longs for an end to the violence and the ability to rest. Quote 56. But chance doesn't enter into it. But I admit this traveler is really too confiding. His innocence is too much of a good thing. Martha dismisses the idea of chance, seeing everything as part of a calculated plan. However, she acknowledges that John's innocence makes the situation more difficult, as his trust and naivety irritate her. This moment reveals Martha's frustration with her role, and how her victim's vulnerability sometimes challenges her resolve to carry out the murders. Quote 57. That, too, is unsound. In the past, we brought neither anger nor pity to our task, only the indifference it needed. The mother reminds Martha that their past killings were done without emotion, driven by cold indifference. She believes that introducing anger or pity into their actions could cloud their judgment, making the task more complicated and dangerous. This quote reflects the mother's internal conflict, as she grapples with maintaining emotional detachment while growing weary of their life of crime. Quote 58. Both of us are sick of this inn and everything to do with it. Martha's statement captures her deep dissatisfaction with the life she and her mother have been living. She feels trapped in the monotonous existence of running the inn, which symbolizes the stagnation and despair they both feel. Martha's longing to escape to a different life reflects her desire to break free from the past and start anew, even if it requires more violence to achieve it. Quote 59. You're right, I know. But why should chance have sent us a victim who is so unsuitable? The mother expresses her hesitation about killing John, feeling that his innocence and trust make him an unfit victim. She struggles with the randomness of their situation, questioning why such an unsuspecting and kind person has come into their lives. Her reluctance underscores her growing disillusionment with their violent lifestyle and her desire for a reprieve from the cycle of killing. Quote 60. Perhaps it's through him we shall save ourselves. The mother sees the possibility of redemption or escape through John, believing that sparing his life could offer them a way out of their murderous existence. Her words suggest a glimmer of hope that by showing mercy, they might find peace and freedom without resorting to more violence. This moment reflects her internal conflict, as she seeks a way to end the suffering they have both endured. Quote 61. Tonight, it shall be, or not at all. Martha's declaration shows her impatience and determination. She feels that they must act immediately, seeing no room for hesitation or delay. For Martha, the decision to kill Jan is final, and she is unwilling to entertain her mother's doubts. Her resoluteness contrasts with the mother's weariness, highlighting the growing divide between them in their approach to their grim existence. Quote 62. When a man starts something, he has no business to look back. Jan reflects on the necessity of commitment and moving forward once a decision has been made. He struggles with feelings of doubt and unease, but reminds himself that once a path is chosen, one must see it through without hesitation. This quote captures John's internal conflict as he tries to reconcile his sense of duty with his desire for personal happiness. Quote 63. You have the autumn, too. Jan offers this statement in response to Martha's pessimism about their environment, suggesting that even in bleak surroundings, there is beauty to be found. He sees autumn as a second spring, where change and decay can also bring a form of renewal and growth. This moment reflects John's optimism and his ability to find value in difficult circumstances, in contrast to Martha's frustration and disillusionment. Quote 64. What is human in me is what I desire, and to get what I desire, I'd stick at nothing. Martha reveals the depth of her ambition and willingness to pursue her goals at any cost. She associates her humanity with desire and drive, seeing obstacles as things to be removed in her pursuit of freedom. This blunt declaration shows her ruthlessness and her readiness to act without regard for others in order to escape her current life. Quote 65. Hearts count for mighty little here. Martha expresses her cynicism, dismissing the importance of emotional connections in their harsh, transactional world. This line underscores her belief that sentimentality has no place in their lives, as survival and practicality have taken precedence over any concerns of the heart. It highlights the bleakness of the environment in which she and her mother live, where personal desires are secondary to necessity. Quote 66. The clouds are banking up still, a solid mass of darkness that will burst and fall upon the earth. John observes the gathering storm, using it as a metaphor for his own internal turmoil. The image of the dark clouds reflects the tension and unease building within him, as he struggles with fear, doubt, and the sense of impending danger. This moment captures the atmosphere of foreboding that surrounds John's return to his family, as he awaits the consequences of his choices. Quote 67. It's not enough in such cases to declare oneself. It's I. One has to make oneself loved, as well. John acknowledges that merely identifying himself as his mother's son is not sufficient to restore their relationship. He understands that he must earn their love and trust again, recognizing the emotional effort required to reconnect with family. This quote reflects John's growing awareness of the complexity of relationships and the need for more than just words to heal past wounds. Quote 68. Sometimes a cup of tea's enough to keep our guests here. Martha's statement reveals her pragmatic and manipulative approach to running the inn. She sees even small gestures, like offering tea, as ways to maintain control over their guests and ensure they stay longer. Her remark reflects the transactional nature of her interactions with others, where every action is calculated for its benefit, devoid of genuine kindness. Quote 69. The least I can do is to do it honor, and so I shall have played my part until I leave this place. John resolves to fulfill his role as the returning prodigal son. Despite the awkwardness and emotional strain he feels, he decides to carry out his duty with dignity, even though he remains uncertain about his place in the family and his future. This statement captures John's sense of responsibility and his determination to act with integrity, even in difficult and uncomfortable situations. Quote 70. Our freedom will begin when this night ends. Martha conveys her belief that the completion of their dark task will liberate her and her mother from the oppressive weight of their existence. To Martha, the murder of John is a means to an end, a final step toward the freedom she craves. Her words reflect her relentless drive for escape, viewing the crime as a necessary step toward a life unburdened by the dreary present. Quote 71. I dislike having my hand forced like this. The mother reveals her discomfort with being compelled into the act of murder by Martha's decisiveness. Unlike Martha, who is resolute, the mother feels conflicted, hesitant about proceeding with the crime. This line shows her internal struggle, as she feels pushed into actions she no longer has the strength or desire to carry out, highlighting the growing divide between her and her daughter. Quote 72. Sleep isn't death. The mother observes John's vulnerable state as he sleeps, reflecting on the difference between sleep and death. She contemplates the power they hold over him, realizing that his fate rests in their hands. This moment captures her wavering resolve as she hesitates to turn sleep into death, pondering the moral weight of their actions and the irrevocability of taking a life. Quote 73. Perhaps that is why we must take him there and hand him over to the mercy of the dark water. The mother rationalizes the impending murder by suggesting that the act will bring peace to John, releasing him from the burdens of life. She views death as a form of mercy, an escape from the struggles of existence. This quote illustrates her weariness with life and her justification for the crime, as she seeks to convince herself that the murder is an act of compassion rather than cruelty. Quote 74. But I have a feeling that tomorrow's dawn will never come. As the mother resigns herself to the crime, she voices a haunting premonition that the consequences of their actions will be final and irreversible. Her words suggest a sense of impending doom, as though the act of killing Jan will mark a turning point from which there is no return. This line encapsulates the tragic inevitability of their situation, as the darkness of their choices overtakes any hope for a brighter future. Quote 75. He would have spared our having to teach him that this room is made for sleeping in, and this world for dying in. Martha coldly reflects on John's fate, implying that he has been taught a harsh lesson about the nature of life and death. In her view, The world is a place where death is inescapable, and the room in which John rests is merely a prelude to his inevitable end. Her words reveal her stark, fatalistic outlook on life, where human existence is reduced to mere survival, and death is the only certainty. Quote 76. Nothing's worthwhile the moment one talks about it. Martha dismisses her mother's hesitation and introspection, asserting that discussing their actions only undermines their purpose. She believes that reflection weakens resolve, and that action, not contemplation, is what matters. This line underscores her pragmatic and ruthless approach, as she pushes aside any moral or emotional concerns in favor of completing the task at hand. Quote 77. Yes, and tomorrow I'll be thinking it's a good thing to have done with it. But just now, all I feel is that I'm dead tired, and my heart's dried up within me. The mother expresses her emotional and physical exhaustion after the murder. While she acknowledges that the act was necessary, her words reveal how drained and numb she feels. Her heart, once capable of feeling, now feels desiccated, unable to process emotions or find solace, reflecting the toll the years of violence and guilt have taken on her. Quote 78. Tell me, am I still pretty? Martha's question to her mother reveals her deep desire for affirmation and youthfulness after committing the murder. The act has rejuvenated her, making her feel alive and full of hope for the future she envisions by the sea. Her need to feel pretty reflects her longing for validation and the fantasy that she can still reclaim some joy in life despite her violent actions. Quote 79. A mother's love for her son is now my certainty. The mother discovers that, despite everything she has done and her attempts to suppress her emotions, her love for her son remains undeniable. This line captures the power of maternal love, which resurfaces despite years of emotional detachment and violence. It highlights her tragic realization that love still has a hold over her, even though she thought she had become indifferent. Quote 80. We can forget my brother and your son. What has happened to him has no importance. He had nothing more to get from life. Martha dismisses her brother's life and death, focusing instead on her own need for happiness and fulfillment. Her cold pragmatism reflects her desperation to move on from the tragedy and prioritize her own desires over any grief or remorse. She views John's death as inconsequential because, in her eyes, he had already experienced life, whereas she feels she has been denied the chance to live fully. Quote 81. Crime, too, means solitude, even if 1,000 people join together to commit it. Martha recognizes the isolating nature of crime, even when shared with others. Despite the bond she thought she shared with her mother through their violent acts, she realizes that crime has left her more alone than ever. This line reflects her profound sense of isolation and the realization that crime does not create lasting connections, but rather deepens her loneliness. Quote 82. What concern of mine was it to look after my brother? None whatever. And yet now I'm an outcast in my own home. Martha laments her fate after killing her brother, feeling that she has been unjustly cast out of her family. She rejects any responsibility for her brother's well-being, yet she feels the cruel irony of being abandoned by her mother in favor of the son she murdered. This moment reveals her bitterness and anger at being left alone and unloved, despite having sacrificed everything for her mother. Quote 83. In that southern land, guarded by the sea, to which one can escape, where one can breathe freely, to that sea-guarded land, the gods have no access. Martha fantasizes about a distant land where one can find freedom and peace, free from the constraints of morality and divine judgment. Her vision of this place contrasts sharply with the oppressive reality she inhabits, where she feels trapped by the weight of her actions and her inability to escape her fate. The sea-guarded land represents an unattainable ideal of liberation, a place where she believes she could have found happiness. Quote 84. Pray your God to harden you to stone. It's the happiness he has assigned himself, and the one true happiness. Martha offers Maria a bleak vision of happiness, equating it with emotional numbness and the ability to shut off all feelings. For Martha, the only way to survive in a world filled with suffering and injustice is to become like stone, immune to pain and guilt. Her words reveal her own despair and resignation, as she believes that hardening oneself is the only path to peace in a cruel world. Quote 85. Life and death are one, and man's a faggot for the burning. Neda expresses his nihilistic worldview, seeing no real distinction between life and death. To him, human existence is fleeting and insignificant, with man being destined for destruction. This dark outlook reflects his deep cynicism and belief that life is ultimately meaningless, with individuals being consumed by inevitable forces beyond their control. Quote 86. Cuckolds, your wives are faithful. Cripples, you can walk. And you, the blind, can see. Neda mocks the deceptive nature of political authority, ridiculing the idea that the government can simply deny reality and expect people to accept lies. By pretending everything is perfect, the authorities create an absurd world where obvious truths are ignored. Neda's sarcastic remark points out the absurdity of those in power using falsehoods to maintain control over a disillusioned populace. Quote 87. I need nothing. My scorn will see me through till my last hour. Neda declares his total independence from the world, claiming that his disdain for everything is enough to sustain him. He sees no value in material possessions, relationships, or ideals, relying solely on his contempt for life as a form of emotional armor. His statement reveals his extreme isolation and rejection of all forms of hope or attachment. Quote 88. Tomorrow, you will kiss my mouth. I look at yours, and my cheeks burn. Victoria expresses the passionate love she feels for Diego, focusing on the physical and emotional intensity of their connection. Her longing to be with him burns within her, reflecting the overwhelming desire and excitement that comes with young love. This intimate moment captures the purity and depth of their relationship as they dream of a future together. Quote 89. Nothing is happening. Nothing will happen. Fresh fish. Fresh fish. The chorus of voices in the marketplace celebrates the stability and prosperity of the moment, denying any looming disaster. Their carefree attitude and focus on everyday concerns, like selling fish, contrasts sharply with the ominous comet in the sky. This line reflects the general state of denial within the city, where people cling to the illusion of normalcy despite clear signs of impending catastrophe. Quote 90. Open your pretty eyes, sweet ladies, and you, my noble lords, lend ear. The actor's call to the audience invites them to pay attention to the performance, emphasizing the importance of observation and engagement. His words also hint at the underlying theme of awareness, urging the people to see beyond the superficial and recognize deeper truths. This line reflects the tension between appearance and reality that runs throughout the play as the characters grapple with understanding their world. Quote 91. What's more, I doubt if God is really to blame. Once men start upsetting the apple cart and slaughtering each other, you soon discover that God, though he too knows the ropes, is a mere amateur compared with them. Neda cynically argues that while people often blame God for the world's miseries, it is actually human beings who excel at causing destruction and suffering. He suggests that humans are far more skilled at creating chaos than any divine force could be. This bleak perspective reflects his belief in the fundamental cruelty and violence of human nature, dismissing the idea of divine intervention or responsibility. Quote 92. No one is above honor. Diego, in contrast to Nada's cynicism, holds on to the concept of honor as something that gives his life meaning. He believes that personal integrity is what allows him to face the world with confidence and self-respect. His conviction about the importance of honor highlights his optimistic, hopeful outlook, which clashes with Nada's scornful rejection of such ideals. Quote 93. I like my habits, and change is the one thing I detest. The governor reveals his deep resistance to change, preferring the stability of routine over any disruption, even in the face of crisis. His desire for immobility reflects a broader theme in the play, where authority figures cling to the illusion of control and normalcy, despite the looming threat of the plague. This line highlights his blindness to the necessity of adapting in times of crisis, and his failure to recognize the gravity of the situation. Quote 94. Let everything come to a stop, except wine and folly. The group of drunkards, led by Nada, mockingly support the governor's desire for immobility, but add that indulgence in wine and folly should continue. This sarcastic statement reflects their awareness of the absurdity of the governor's refusal to acknowledge reality. Their focus on self-indulgence in the face of disaster underscores the contrast between the seriousness of the situation and their cynical, carefree attitude toward life and authority. Quote 95. I am torn with pity for these poor people, Victoria. Diego's inner conflict is revealed as he expresses his deep compassion for the suffering townspeople, even as his fiancée, Victoria, urges him to focus on their love. His sense of duty and empathy for others overpowers his personal desires, illustrating the moral dilemma he faces in balancing love with responsibility. This line captures Diego's growing emotional burden as he grapples with the devastation around him. Quote 96. I am the plague, if you really must know. The character representing the plague calmly reveals his identity to the governor, asserting control over the situation. His matter-of-fact tone contrasts sharply with the chaos he brings, emphasizing the inevitability and power of the plague. This line marks the moment when the abstract threat becomes a concrete force, personified and ready to take over the city, highlighting the helplessness of the authorities in the face of such a crisis. Quote 97. But I, Diego, I am living. Victoria passionately reminds Diego of the importance of their love and life, even amidst the horror of the plague. Her words express a defiant embrace of life, urging Diego to focus on their connection rather than the death and suffering around them. This moment underscores the tension between personal happiness and the overwhelming external crisis, as Victoria tries to hold on to their love in the face of impending doom. Quote 98. No! Don't touch me! Diego recoils from Victoria, fearing that he may be infected with the plague and could pass it on to her. His response reveals the extent of his fear and the psychological toll the epidemic has taken on him. This line captures the tragic distance growing between the lovers, as the fear of death and disease begins to overshadow their once joyful relationship. Quote 99. We shall see it through, I'm certain. Diego tries to reassure Victoria, expressing his hope and determination to survive the crisis together. Despite his fear and the overwhelming situation, he clings to the belief that they will make it through, holding on to a sense of optimism. This line highlights Diego's struggle to maintain hope in the face of uncertainty, as he tries to balance his duty to others with his desire to protect his love. Quote 100. I am the ruler here. This is a fact. Therefore, it is a right. The plague asserts his dominance over the city by stating that his control is both a fact and a right. This line reflects the authoritarian nature of the plague, who sees his power as unquestionable and justified simply because he exists. The statement emphasizes the inevitability of his rule, showing that resistance is futile, as his presence alone gives him authority over the people. Quote 101. I prefer to look like a quite ordinary person, let's say a sergeant or a corporal. The plague explains that his appearance is deliberately unremarkable, designed to be more unsettling than a dramatic or monstrous figure. By presenting himself as an ordinary person, he blends into everyday life, making his influence even more pervasive. This line highlights how the plague's power is rooted in its ability to infiltrate and control without drawing attention to itself, representing the insidious nature of fear and control. Quote 102. Sentiment is banned, and so are other imbecilities, such as the fuss you make about your precious happiness. The plague declares that emotions, especially those related to happiness and love, are irrelevant under his rule. This line underscores the cold, rational control he seeks to impose, where emotions are seen as weaknesses that must be eliminated. The plague's disdain for human feelings reveals the dehumanizing nature of his regime, where order and logic are prioritized over individual well-being and joy. Quote 103. As from today, you are going to learn to die in an orderly manner. The plague imposes a new system of death on the city, declaring that even death must follow a structured, organized process. This line reflects the plague's obsession with control and efficiency, as he seeks to regulate even the most personal and natural aspects of life. It symbolizes the complete domination of the plague, where nothing, not even death, is left to chance or individual choice. Quote 104. There will be no more dying, as the fancy takes you. The plague criticizes the randomness with which people used to die, imposing his own rigid system on the process of death. This line emphasizes the plague's desire to eliminate spontaneity and unpredictability, turning death into something controlled and predictable. It reflects the theme of authoritarian control, where even the act of dying must conform to the plague's strict rules. Quote 105. Fate has learned wisdom and will keep its records. The plague asserts that fate, once chaotic and unpredictable, is now organized and documented under his rule. This line symbolizes the transformation of fate into something that can be controlled and manipulated by those in power. The idea of keeping records reinforces the plague's bureaucratic, methodical approach to control, where every life and death is accounted for and managed. Quote 106. You will figure in statistics, so at last you'll serve some purpose. The plague reduces human life to mere numbers and statistics, stripping away individuality and significance. This line reflects the dehumanization that comes with authoritarian control, where people are no longer seen as individuals, but as data points to be managed. The plague's statement reveals the ultimate goal of his regime, to reduce humanity to something orderly and utilitarian, devoid of meaning or emotion. Quote 107. So, line up for a decent death. That's your first duty. The plague commands the people to accept their fate and die in a manner that adheres to his orderly system. This line highlights the plague's total control over life and death, demanding that the citizens conform to his rules even in their final moments. It underscores the theme of submission to authority, where personal autonomy is surrendered in exchange for the illusion of order and structure. Quote 108. You can dispense with bread and with a wife, but a properly drawn-up certificate, no matter what it says, is something you can't possibly dispense with. The secretary emphasizes the importance of bureaucratic control, claiming that official documentation is more essential than basic needs like food or family. This statement reflects the absurdity and dehumanization of the plague's regime, where individual lives are reduced to paperwork, and survival depends on complying with nonsensical rules. Quote 109. Reasons for existing? The fisherman is incredulous when asked to justify his existence, as the concept seems absurd to him. His confusion reflects the senselessness of the plague's administration, which demands rational explanations for the most fundamental aspects of life. This question highlights the regime's attempt to control not only people's actions, but also their very right to exist. Quote 110. We start with the premises that you are guilty. But that's not enough. You must learn to feel, yourselves, that you are guilty. The secretary reveals the plague's method of control, where guilt is presumed and citizens are forced to internalize their own supposed wrongdoings. This line illustrates the regime's psychological manipulation, where the goal is not just obedience, but the complete submission of the mind. It reflects the totalitarian nature of the plague's rule, where guilt is universal and unquestionable. Quote 111. Execution, that puts it in a nutshell, and the man who is to die is expected to collaborate in his own execution. The plague outlines his philosophy of control, where the ultimate goal is to have individuals participate willingly in their own destruction. This statement captures the chilling efficiency of the regime, where victims are made to comply with their fate, stripping them of any agency or resistance. It underscores the dehumanizing logic of the plague's administration, which values order and compliance above all else. Quote 112. I deported him along with some others who were giving trouble, but whose lives I wished to spare. The plague casually mentions that he has deported individuals who caused trouble, framing it as an act of mercy. This euphemism for imprisonment or worse highlights the cold detachment of the plague's rule, where human lives are manipulated without regard for their value. The line reveals the authoritarian power at play, where the plague's decisions are presented as benevolent, even when they are destructive. Quote 113. We must speed up the transformation of innocent into guilty parties. That's the only way of making sure of our labor supply. The plague admits that the regime's survival depends on turning innocent people into criminals, ensuring a steady flow of labor. This line reflects the cynical nature of the plague's government, where maintaining control requires constant accusations and the manufacturing of guilt. It exposes the corrupt system in which innocence is impossible, and guilt is a tool for exploitation. Quote 114. It's not compulsory. The secretary offers Diego the option to wear the plague badge, insisting that it is not mandatory. However, the underlying implication is clear. Refusal leads to other consequences. This statement highlights the illusion of choice in the plague's regime, where freedom is presented but ultimately meaningless. It reveals the subtle coercion at play, where compliance is enforced through fear of the alternative. Quote 115. The last gate is shut, and we are locked up together, we and the plague. The chorus laments the closing of the final gate, symbolizing their complete entrapment alongside the plague. This line represents the hopelessness of the situation, where escape is no longer possible, and the citizens are doomed to live under the plague's control. It reflects the broader theme of confinement and isolation, both physical and psychological, as the people are cut off from freedom and hope. Quote 116. You will not be given accommodation because your children are homeless. You will be given it if you supply a certificate, which is not the same thing. Nada explains the bureaucratic absurdity of the system, where basic needs like shelter are not granted based on real human suffering, but only upon the submission of the proper documentation. This quote highlights the dehumanization and senseless rigidity of the regime, where following procedures takes precedence over addressing the actual needs of the people. Quote 117. We want to fix things up in such a way that nobody understands a word of what his neighbor says. Nada reveals the regime's goal of fostering confusion and isolation by ensuring that people can no longer communicate effectively with one another. This strategy of disconnecting people from one another is a tool for control, as it prevents unity and collective action. It reflects the oppressive nature of the regime, which seeks to isolate individuals and keep them powerless. Quote 118. We are innocent. Diego declares the innocence of the townspeople, contrasting it with the guilt and corruption of the plague. His statement underscores the purity of their intentions and their suffering under the unjust rule of the plague, but it also reflects Diego's defiance. His assertion of innocence stands in opposition to the plague's regime, which presumes guilt as a means of maintaining control. Quote 119. Brand them all. Even what they do not say makes itself heard. The plague orders the branding of the townspeople, marking them not only for what they have done, but for their very existence and unspoken thoughts. This line reflects the invasive nature of the regime's power, where silence is not enough to protect people from suspicion and persecution. It shows how totalitarian systems seek to control even the inner lives of individuals. Quote 120. A man who runs away is ours. The plague asserts that those who attempt to escape are still within his grasp, as their fear and flight only strengthen his control over them. This line reflects the idea that resistance is futile under the plague's regime. Even those who seek freedom cannot escape its reach. It highlights the suffocating nature of the authority that extends its power over all aspects of life. Quote 121. Innocence, you murderer. Do you know what's meant by innocence? Diego confronts the plague, accusing it of destroying innocence and asking if it even understands the concept. This quote captures Diego's moral outrage at the plague's indiscriminate violence and cruelty. It highlights the conflict between purity and corruption, with Diego representing the last vestiges of hope and humanity in a world consumed by death and decay. Quote 122. What do I care for your love, if it doesn't rot along with me? Diego, consumed by despair and fear of death, lashes out at Victoria, expressing his possessive and destructive feelings toward her. His love becomes tainted by his impending death, and he can no longer appreciate her beauty or love if it will continue without him. This moment reveals the dark, possessive side of love when faced with mortality, as Diego's fear warps his feelings into something toxic. Quote 123. But, Diego, I will follow you. To hell, if need be. Victoria affirms her loyalty and love for Diego, willing to follow him even to the most dangerous and despairing places. This declaration of love reflects her willingness to sacrifice everything for him, including her life, and stands in stark contrast to Diego's earlier possessiveness. It represents the redemptive power of love and loyalty, even in the face of overwhelming fear and despair. Quote 124. I cannot stand aloof with all this suffering around me. Diego expresses his deep sense of responsibility and moral obligation to those suffering from the plague. He cannot ignore the pain of others, feeling compelled to be with them and help them. This statement highlights his inner conflict between his love for Victoria and his duty to the larger community. It reflects his transition from a personal focus to a broader, collective one, even at the cost of his personal happiness. Quote 125. Love? They have ruled love out. Diego remarks on the oppressive regime's attempt to suppress love, viewing it as a dangerous emotion that challenges the order they seek to impose. This line captures the dehumanization of society under the plague's rule, where even love is seen as a threat to control. Diego's despair over losing Victoria shows how the regime seeks to strip away all meaningful human connections. Quote 126. The anguish that you have within yourself, master that, and all the rest will follow. Victoria urges Diego to confront his inner turmoil, suggesting that by mastering his own fears and struggles, he can overcome the external challenges they face. She believes that self-control and emotional strength are the keys to defeating the external forces of oppression. Her advice reflects her own resilience and determination to face adversity with love and courage. Quote 127. Each word you utter is a dagger in my heart. Victoria expresses the deep pain Diego's words cause her, as his internal conflict and refusal to fully embrace her love tear at her emotionally. She feels that every expression of his doubt and fear drives a wedge between them, hurting her more than any external force could. This quote highlights the emotional toll their struggle takes on their relationship, as love and duty pull them in opposite directions. Quote 128. You are simply splendid when you are angry. The secretary's remark after Diego's passionate outburst reveals the twisted nature of the regime, where resistance and defiance are admired but also manipulated. Her admiration for Diego's strength in his moment of anger shows how even the most genuine human emotions can be exploited by those in power. This line underscores the complex dynamics of power and control in the play. Quote 129. When a man conquers his fear and stands up to them, sometimes it actually begins to fold up. The secretary acknowledges that the oppressive system has a flaw. It weakens when people overcome their fear and resist. This revelation gives Diego and the audience hope that resistance is not futile. The line encapsulates a key theme of the play, where the true power of the regime lies in the people's submission, and once that fear is conquered, the system begins to crumble. Quote 130. The wind is rising. As the play draws to a close, this line symbolizes the change and hope that are coming. The wind represents a force of renewal and freedom, suggesting that the oppressive grip of the plague is weakening. It marks the beginning of a new chapter, where the people may reclaim their freedom and humanity. Diego's realization that the wind is rising signifies the potential for resistance and transformation. Quote 131. You are not alone. I stand beside you, and I am armed for the fight. Victoria declares her unwavering support for Diego, affirming her readiness to face the challenges ahead with him. Her commitment to stand by his side, even in the face of overwhelming odds, reflects the power of love and solidarity. This line encapsulates the strength of their bond, as she offers him the emotional support he needs to continue fighting against the regime. Quote 132. Rub out the stars. Open the windows. Diego takes control and gives commands that symbolize the removal of fear and the opening of new possibilities. The stars, which represent the plague's control and fear, are erased, and the windows are opened to let in light and air, symbolizing freedom. This marks a turning point where Diego begins to lead the people toward liberation from the oppressive forces that have been controlling them. Quote 133. Throw away your gags and proclaim with me that you have stopped being afraid. Diego urges the people to remove their symbolic gags, which represent their silence and submission to the plague's rule. By discarding their fear, Diego encourages them to reclaim their voices and their power, showing that their liberation is tied to overcoming the fear that has kept them enslaved. It signifies a collective rebellion against the authoritarian regime that has silenced them. Quote 134. Cease talking of despair. Despair is a gag. Diego insists that despair only serves to silence and suppress the people, much like a physical gag. He urges them to reject hopelessness because it keeps them from acting and fighting for their freedom. This quote highlights the connection between fear, despair, and submission, and the importance of hope in overcoming oppression. Quote 135. Long live death, you no longer frighten us. In this powerful declaration, Diego and the people confront death itself, asserting that it no longer holds power over them. By rejecting the fear of death, they free themselves from the control that the plague has over them. This moment symbolizes the ultimate act of defiance, where the people reclaim their autonomy and refuse to be paralyzed by the threat of death. Quote 136. Neither fear nor hatred. Therein lies our victory. Diego reveals that true victory comes from rejecting both fear and hatred. He understands that freedom is not only about overcoming external forces, but also about resisting the internal emotions that can divide and destroy. This line underscores the moral victory of the people, as they rise above the destructive emotions that the plague relies on to maintain control. Quote 137. I have prisons and executioners on my side. Power and blood are my ministers. The plague boasts of the tools of his control, prisons, executioners, and violence, emphasizing the oppressive nature of his rule. His reliance on force and fear highlights the brutal reality of his power. This statement contrasts with Diego's vision of liberation, where the people's power comes from unity, courage, and rejecting fear. Quote 138. When strong men take off their uniforms, they are not pretty sights. Diego challenges the plague by insisting that the true strength of a man is not found in the symbols of power, like uniforms, but in his moral integrity. By asking the plague to remove his uniform, Diego implies that without the trappings of authority, the plague is weak and unworthy of respect. This line represents Diego's belief in the inner strength of the human spirit over external symbols of power. Quote 139. My life is nothing. What count for me are my reasons for living. Diego expresses his willingness to sacrifice his life because what matters to him is the purpose behind his actions. His life has value only insofar as it is dedicated to a greater cause, freedom and justice for his people. This selfless perspective contrasts with the plague's philosophy of selfish survival, highlighting Diego's moral superiority and commitment to his principles. Quote 140. This girl's love is my private property, and I can deal with it as I choose. But those men's freedom belongs to them. I have no rights over it. Diego draws a distinction between personal love, which he claims as his own, and the freedom of the people, which he views as a collective right. This quote shows Diego's sense of responsibility and justice, as he acknowledges that he cannot trade the freedom of others, emphasizing that liberty is not something he can control or give away. Quote 141. No one can be happy without causing harm to others. That is the world's justice. The plague asserts a cynical view of the world, arguing that happiness always comes at the expense of others. This reflects his belief in a cruel, unjust world where suffering is inevitable, and where personal joy can only be achieved through the misfortune of others. It reveals the plague's philosophy of power, where life is inherently exploitative. Quote 142. To do away with murder, we must kill, and to prevent injustice, we must do violence. Diego rejects the common argument that violence is necessary to achieve justice. He critiques the hypocrisy of using violent means to end violence, highlighting the cycle of destruction that such logic perpetuates. His refusal to accept this idea shows his commitment to a higher moral standard, where true justice cannot be built on violence. Quote 143. No man is good enough to be entrusted with absolute power. That I grant you. Diego acknowledges the inherent danger of absolute power, agreeing that no individual should wield unchecked authority. This admission reflects his understanding of human flaws and the corrupting influence of power. However, Diego contrasts this by emphasizing the compassion that should be extended to ordinary people, who are not inherently evil but shaped by their circumstances. Quote 144. If I am not faithful to the humble truth I share with them, how could I keep faith with the greater, lonelier ideal that is mine? Diego reveals that his loyalty to the common people, despite their flaws, is essential to his larger ideals. He believes that staying true to the simple, shared truths with the people gives him the strength to pursue his higher moral aspirations. This quote reflects his belief in solidarity and humility, even while pursuing greater goals. Quote 145. When one of them kills, he does it in a gust of passion. But you slaughter people logically, legally, cold-bloodedly. Diego contrasts the impulsive crimes of ordinary people with the calculated violence of the plague. While people may commit wrongs in moments of passion, the plague represents a systematic and emotionless form of killing, which Diego finds far more reprehensible. This line highlights the dehumanizing nature of the plague's rule, where violence is institutionalized and detached from humanity. Quote 146. If you had made over this city to me, you would have lost this girl, and you, too, would have been lost. The plague admits that had Diego surrendered the city, he would have lost everything, including his love for Victoria and his own sense of self. This moment acknowledges that Diego's resistance has preserved both the city's freedom and his own integrity, showing that true victory comes not from surrender, but from standing firm in one's values. Quote 147. I have squared up accounts with death. There lies my strength. Diego reveals that by accepting his own mortality, he has gained strength. His confrontation with death has allowed him to find peace, knowing that he acted with honor and purpose. This line reflects the existential theme of the play, where true power comes from facing death with courage and integrity, rather than running from it. Quote 148. Freedom can be a prison, so long as a single man on earth is kept in bondage. Stepan expresses his belief that true freedom cannot exist while others remain enslaved or oppressed. His statement reflects his radical worldview, where personal liberty is meaningless if injustice persists elsewhere. This highlights the theme of collective liberation over individual freedom, showing how deeply Stepan's sense of justice is tied to the plight of the oppressed. Quote 149. There's only one thing that is revolutionary: the bomb. Stepan reduces revolution to a single violent act, the use of the bomb. For him, revolution is not about ideals, poetry, or theory. It's about action and destruction. This stark perspective underscores his militant approach to change, contrasting with more idealistic or nuanced views within the group, particularly those of Caligula. Quote 150. One must give one's life to fighting it. Voynov, after recounting his expulsion from university for speaking the truth, expresses the realization that to combat injustice, one must fully commit, even to the point of sacrificing one's life. This shows his journey from passive opposition to active resistance, illustrating the theme of revolutionary dedication that pervades the play. Quote 151. I love life. I joined the revolution because I love life. Caligula declares that his motivation for joining the revolution comes from his love for life, not hatred or nihilism. This line reflects his belief that revolution should serve life, beauty, and happiness, rather than being an end in itself. It highlights the contrast between Caligula's idealism and Stepan's harsher, more violent approach to revolution. Quote 152. When we kill, we're killing so as to build up a world in which there will be no more killing. Caligula justifies the act of assassination by claiming that it is necessary to create a future where such violence will no longer be needed. His reasoning reveals the moral paradox of revolutionary violence, where temporary brutality is seen as a necessary means to achieve long-term peace. This line encapsulates the tension between idealism and the harsh realities of revolutionary action. Quote 153. To die for an ideal. That's the only way of proving oneself worthy of it. Caligula expresses his belief that dying for the cause is the ultimate form of commitment. He sees his own death as the necessary proof of his dedication to the revolution, revealing his deep desire for martyrdom. This statement highlights the importance of sacrifice in revolutionary thought and reflects Caligula's personal code of honor. Quote 154. But throwing the bomb and then climbing the scaffold, that's giving one's life twice. Dora points out that not only is the act of throwing the bomb a sacrifice, but facing execution afterward is an additional form of giving one's life. This notion of dying twice elevates the act of revolution to something greater than mere violence, framing it as a profound, personal commitment to a cause that demands total self-sacrifice. Quote 155. It's not he I'm killing despotism. Caligula insists that his target is not the man himself, but the system of despotism that he represents. This line shows how revolutionaries often separate the personal from the political, justifying their violent actions by focusing on the larger structures of power and oppression. It reflects Kaliayev's attempt to maintain moral clarity in the face of an impending assassination. Quote 156. I've trained myself to keep calm just when I'm most afraid. Dora admits that although fear has been a constant companion during her years in the group, she has learned to control it. This quote highlights her resilience and emotional strength, showing that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of it. Her calmness is a product of training and survival, not a lack of fear. Quote 157. There were children in the Grand Duke's carriage. Stepan reveals the reason why Kalyaev did not throw the bomb. There were children present. This moment is pivotal, as it brings the ethical dilemma of revolutionary violence to the forefront. The presence of innocent children complicates the clear-cut mission of killing the Grand Duke, forcing the group to confront the human consequences of their actions. Quote 158. I'd have had to throw it at them. Like that. Straight at them. No, I just couldn't bring myself. Kalyaev explains his decision not to throw the bomb, recounting how he couldn't target the children. His deep sensitivity and humanity are revealed in this moment, showing that, despite his commitment to the revolution, there are moral lines he cannot cross. His inability to harm innocent children distinguishes him from Stepan and others who might prioritize the cause above all else. Quote 159. I'm ready to shed blood, so as to overthrow the present despotism. But, behind your words, I see the threat of another despotism. Kalyaev challenges Stepan's ruthless approach, recognizing that using unchecked violence to achieve freedom can lead to a new form of tyranny. He fears that if the revolution sacrifices its moral integrity, it will replace one form of oppression with another. This quote captures the tension between revolutionary idealism and the harsh realities of violent resistance. Quote 160. When that day comes, the revolution will be loathed by the whole human race. Dora warns Stepan that a revolution built on the indiscriminate killing of innocents, like children, will ultimately lose the support of the people. Her belief that humanity will reject a revolution that goes too far shows her commitment to maintaining ethical limits, even in the pursuit of justice. She argues that without moral boundaries, the revolution itself will be corrupted. Quote 161. Killing children is a crime against a man's honor. Kalyaev declares that targeting innocent children is a violation of honor, setting a firm moral boundary in his revolutionary ideology. He believes that there must be limits to violence, even in the fight against despotism, and that crossing those lines would strip the revolution of its moral purpose. This statement defines his commitment to a more just and humane form of resistance. Quote 162. The truth is that you don't believe in the revolution, any of you. Stepan accuses his comrades of lacking true commitment to the revolution because they hesitate to make the ultimate sacrifices, even when it involves killing children. He argues that their unwillingness to go to any lengths reveals doubt in their cause. This quote reflects Stepan's extreme, uncompromising view of revolutionary action, where any hesitation is seen as weakness or betrayal. Quote 163. I have chosen death so as to prevent murder from triumphing in the world. Kalyaev asserts that his willingness to die is driven by a desire to prevent senseless violence from prevailing. He sees his role not as a murderer, but as someone who sacrifices himself to create a world free from murder. This line encapsulates his moral vision, where death is embraced as a necessary sacrifice to achieve justice without perpetuating endless violence. Quote 164. I thought it was quite easy to kill, provided one has courage and is buoyed up by an ideal. But now I've lost my wings. Kalyaev reflects on the harsh reality of committing violence, realizing that courage and ideals are not enough to make killing easy. His loss of wings symbolizes the disillusionment he feels as he confronts the moral weight of his actions. This quote reveals his inner conflict as he grapples with the gap between his ideals and the brutality of his mission. Quote 165. Those whose hearts are set on justice have no right to love. Dora asserts that those dedicated to the cause of justice must abandon love, as their mission demands complete focus and emotional detachment. Her statement suggests that the pursuit of justice leaves no room for personal happiness or human tenderness, reflecting the sacrifice revolutionaries must make. This line highlights the tension between love and duty in the lives of the characters. Quote 166. We are the just ones, and outside there is warmth and light, but not for us, never for us. Dora expresses the isolation felt by those committed to the revolutionary cause. She and her comrades are the just ones, but their sense of justice separates them from the warmth and joys of ordinary life. This line captures the loneliness and emotional cost of their mission, as they sacrifice personal happiness for a higher ideal. Quote 167. For people like me who don't believe in a God, there is no alternative between total justice and utter despair. Stepan reveals the starkness of his worldview, where the absence of God leaves him with only two choices: total justice or complete despair. His belief that there is no middle ground reflects his extreme dedication to the revolutionary cause and his deep bitterness. This line underscores the all-or-nothing mentality that drives him and the emotional toll it takes. Quote 168. Yannick will kill the Grand Duke, I'd swear to it. And it will be a good day's work. A very good day's work. Destruction. That's what's wanted. Stepan expresses his belief in the necessity of destruction to achieve revolutionary goals. His focus on a good day's work reveals his cold, practical view of violence, where the killing of the Grand Duke is seen as a necessary step toward revolution. This line illustrates Stepan's uncompromising approach to justice, where the ends justify the means. Quote 169. Love calls for time, and we have hardly time enough for justice. Dora acknowledges the difficulty of balancing love and the revolutionary cause. She suggests that love requires time and space to grow, but the demands of their mission leave little room for personal relationships. This quote reflects the sacrifices revolutionaries must make, as they prioritize justice over personal happiness. Quote 170. I love you with the same love as yours, a love that's half frozen because it's rooted in justice and reared in prison cells. Dora describes her love for Caligula as half-frozen, shaped by their shared dedication to justice and their experiences of hardship. This line captures the cold, restrained nature of their relationship, where love is intertwined with their revolutionary mission. It reflects the emotional cost of their commitment, where even love is tempered by the harsh realities of their struggle. Quote 171. And it's we who have killed him. It's we who have killed him. It's I. Dora's grief over Caligula's death erupts as she blames herself for his fate. Her realization that their revolutionary actions have led to his death highlights the tragic cost of their mission. This moment encapsulates the deep emotional consequences of the violence they have committed, as Dora is consumed by guilt and sorrow over the loss of someone she loves. Quote 172. I have never had time to be young. Caligula reflects on the loss of his youth, sacrificed for his commitment to the revolutionary cause. His statement underscores the heavy burden of his ideals, which have taken away the time and freedom for personal growth or joy. This line highlights the theme of sacrifice in the play, showing how the revolution consumes the lives of those who devote themselves to it. Quote 173. It was not you I spared, but the children you had with you. Kalyaev explains to the Grand Duchess that his mercy was directed at the innocent children, not at her. His refusal to kill children reveals his moral boundaries, even as a revolutionary assassin. This moment emphasizes the internal conflict between Kalyaev's commitment to justice and his personal ethics, as he draws a line between necessary violence and the protection of innocence. Quote 174. To die? You want to die? No. It is your duty to accept being a murderer. The Grand Duchess confronts Kalyaev, urging him to acknowledge the full weight of his actions. She argues that by dying, he escapes the responsibility of facing his crime. Her words challenge Kalyaev's view of his own righteousness, pushing him to accept the reality of the murder, not just as an abstract act of justice, but as a personal moral failure. Quote 175. There is no love where God is not. The Grand Duchess expresses her belief that true love cannot exist without God. She sees spiritual faith as essential to any meaningful love or connection, contrasting with Kalyaev's revolutionary love for humanity, which is rooted in justice rather than divine grace. This line represents the ideological divide between them, where faith and revolution stand in opposition. Quote 176. You are, and so are all your kind. There is something even fouler than being a criminal. It's forcing into crime a man who is not made for it. Kalyaev accuses the Grand Duchess and the ruling class of corrupting people like him, who are driven to commit crimes out of a sense of justice. He believes that his natural inclination was not to be a murderer, but the oppressive system forced him into it. This quote captures his bitterness and anger at being shaped into a killer by the very society he seeks to overthrow. Quote 177. The only feeling I have toward you is pity. You have touched my heart. Kalyaev admits that he feels pity for the Grand Duchess, showing a moment of vulnerability and humanity. Despite their opposing sides, he recognizes her suffering and expresses empathy. This line reflects his internal struggle between his role as a revolutionary and his personal compassion, demonstrating that even amidst violence, he retains a sense of moral conscience. Quote 178. I shall turn my back on you and on this loathsome world forever, and at last my heart will flood with joy, the joy of love fulfilled. Kalyaev anticipates finding peace in death, where he will finally be free from the suffering and injustice of the world. He sees his execution as a form of liberation, where his love for his comrades and his cause will be fully realized. This line highlights the idealism that drives him, as he seeks meaning and redemption through sacrifice. Quote 179. You do not know their love. Kalyaev asserts that Skuratov cannot understand the deep bond of brotherhood shared among the revolutionaries. His confidence in the strength of their loyalty reflects his belief in the revolutionary ideal of solidarity. This line emphasizes the theme of camaraderie and mutual trust that underpins the revolutionary movement, even in the face of betrayal or doubt. Quote 180. With the first murder, youth ends forever. Dora reflects on the irreversible change that comes with committing violence. She believes that once a person engages in killing, they lose their innocence, and their life is forever altered. This line encapsulates the heavy moral cost of revolutionary violence, highlighting how it ages and burdens the soul, stripping away any sense of youthful purity. Quote 181. Our children's children, others, yes. But Yanek is in prison, and the rope is cold. Dora expresses the tragic reality that while the revolution might benefit future generations, Yanek is about to be executed. Her words highlight the tension between the idealistic goals of the revolution and the immediate personal suffering it causes. The cold rope symbolizes the harshness and finality of Yanek's fate, contrasting with the distant hope for a better future. Quote 182. Russia will live, our children's children will live. Do you remember what Janek used to say? Russia will become the land of our dream. Annenkov recalls Janek's hopeful vision for the future of Russia, where the revolution would lead to a just and free society. His words reflect the motivation behind their struggle, emphasizing the belief that their sacrifices are for the greater good of the nation. This quote encapsulates the revolutionary idealism that drives the characters, even as they face personal loss and despair. Quote 183. Perhaps, at this very moment, he is going out into the prison yard, and all the people there are falling silent as he approaches. Dora imagines Janek's final moments before his execution, picturing the solemn atmosphere in the prison yard. Her vivid imagining of his death illustrates her deep emotional connection to him and the overwhelming grief she feels. This moment reflects the anguish and helplessness of waiting for the inevitable, as Dora contemplates the grim reality of Janek's fate. Quote 184. With a happy heart that I embarked on our great adventure, and it's with a sad heart that I keep to it. Dora contrasts the joy and optimism she felt at the beginning of the revolutionary cause with the sorrow and disillusionment she now experiences. This line reveals the emotional toll of the revolution, where the initial hope has been replaced by the grim realities of violence and loss. It shows how the journey has drained her of the idealism that once fueled her commitment. Quote 185. We must go on and on and on. How good it would be to rest a bit. But that's impossible. Dora expresses the exhausting, relentless nature of their revolutionary struggle. Despite her longing for rest and peace, she knows they must continue fighting. Her words capture the sense of inevitability and burden that comes with their cause, where there is no room for respite or personal happiness, only the constant push toward their goal. Quote 186. Janek was faithful to the end. Stepan reports that Janek remained true to his ideals and refused to waver, even in the face of death. This line affirms Janek's steadfast commitment to the revolutionary cause, reinforcing his role as a martyr who upheld his principles until the very end. It serves as a source of pride and validation for his comrades, who see his death as proof of his integrity and strength. Quote 187. I want to throw it. I want to be the first to throw. In the aftermath of Janek's execution, Dora demands to take his place and throw the next bomb. Her desire to carry out the next act of violence shows how deeply affected she is by his death, and her determination to continue the revolutionary fight. This line reflects her transformation, as grief and anger propel her toward further action, even at the cost of her own life. Camus's plays in this collection collectively examine the darker aspects of the human condition: power, rebellion, and the existential search for meaning. In Caligula, the emperor's unyielding pursuit of absolute freedom leads him to defy societal norms and embrace a nihilistic worldview, a tragic exploration of what happens when the desire for total autonomy eclipses empathy and human connection. These plays challenge audiences to confront uncomfortable questions about the human desire for power, the inevitability of death, and the quest for purpose in an absurd world. Through powerful dialogues and complex characters, Camus leaves us with the unsettling truth that freedom, without regard for others, ultimately leads to destruction.
Curious to dive into the mind of Albert Camus? With StudyLab Pro's Book GPT, it's possible. Ask questions, explore themes, and discover the depths of Caligula and 3 other plays in an entirely new way. Start your conversation now by clicking on our logo. And if you're hungry for more educational content, subscribe to our channel to keep discovering, learning, and growing. Want more than just videos? Click on our logo now to join us on our platform for multiple choice tests, in-depth content, and and tools to help you ace your studies. Get started now.